I knew almost instantly that the house-sitting gig was not going to be the entourage fantasy for which I had pined. The keys to that gig would arrive in a titanium briefcase with a long list of prohibitions. This one arrived with a hard sell. Wouldn't you like a weekend in a big, beautiful house in Venice you have all to yourself? My suspicions were ignited. Still, there was something seductive to me about that Nick and Nora intimacy that sometimes develops between an agent and their assistant, the cunning tactician matched with their trusty squire. Sure, it could get intense. How could it not when you're on every call they make, familiar with every detail of their life, and schedule every second of their day? I had one colleague who wouldn't book his boss for any 2:30 p.m. meetings, the standard post-lunch meeting time, because that was the time every day his boss liked to take a shit. I didn't need that level of intimacy, but I could see how we might become a more diabolical killing machine if we were just a hint more enmeshed. The house-sitting stint seemed like a simple means to that end. I accepted the gig. We did a walk through the night before I moved in, and my suspicions were quickly confirmed. The house was perfectly nice. A modest post and beam somewhere off Lincoln. In today's market, it would probably settle for like $5 million. But there was no tennis pavilion, no bottomless supply of bandol. This was not the place where I was going to entertain Hollywood's young glitterati and plot my ascent. What's more, there were a couple of previously undisclosed obligations that came with the gig. First, there was a dog. Maybe he mentioned that. I don't remember. But, okay, I thought, I can handle that. He was cute. I grew up with dogs. No big deal. There were also these tomato bushes. My boss's wife had planted 8 or so tomato bushes that towered impressively out of their concrete drive, festooned with small, green, unripe fruit. She showed me how to water them, claiming excitedly, "They should ripen any day. The guy at the nursery said 6 weeks. That's now." I can't say I was thrilled by any of this. Clearly, my boss and his wife were more interested in a free dog sitter / gardener than an honorarium for their capable steward. Still, none of it felt like anything I could not handle. Then they showed me their kitchen. And here was something I had not anticipated. They practiced Orthodox Judaism, so they kept a kosher kitchen. That meant 2 refrigerators, 2 stoves, 2 dishwashers, 2 sets of forks, knives, and spoons, and 2 sets of every dish and utensil in the house. It was overwhelming to me. I mean, I'm sure they explained it all in the simplest of terms, but I barely listened because, to be honest, I was too scared I'd commit some egregious faux pas if I asked any follow-up questions. And I had a lot of questions, like, wait, what are we keeping separate? This was not the first question about Orthodox Judaism that I'd kept to myself since starting at William Morris. In fact, I had been stockpiling queries since the instant I was nearly fired on that recent Friday afternoon. Immediately after that conversation, my boss had started piling scripts into his bag. He was going home. It was only 5 p.m. This was unheard of at William Morris. Sure, official hours may have demarked a 9 to 5 workday, but every office stayed open until at least 7. I had never seen an agent leave this early. But as he breezed past my desk on his way out, he called to me breathlessly, "I have to get home for Shabbat." And he was out. Shabbat? He said it in a way that made it sound like I should certainly know what that meant. And maybe I should have. My own Catholicism clearly shared a not insignificant amount of DNA with his religion, right? I mean, Shabbat does sound almost the same as Sabbath, but it's just enough different that a big dumb goy like me might feel it prudent to proceed with caution. What's more, I had always been taught that the Sabbath was a Sunday thing. So what were we doing observing it on a Friday? And if that were not confusing enough, sometimes he left early for home on Fridays for something called Shabbos. Now I know it's Friday, and this word also sounds a lot like Sabbath, but it could be something different, right? Friends and colleagues from his synagogue might call and leave a message that said, "Shabbat Shalom," but then they might also call and say, "Gut Shabbos." One thing I learned is that regardless of their message, nothing made my boss howl with greater laughter than listening to me, his big dumb goy, standing in front of his desk reading off these salutations as I updated our progress on the phone sheet. But once he was out of town, my first impulse was to just throw my hands up at the whole house sitting thing. Sure, I'd stop by and walk and feed the dog, but I wasn't going to live there. I had a life. I had a nice house, and I was pretty sure the mere presence of my dumb goy energy in my boss's place was going to contaminate it. Was vodka kosher? I didn't know. How about cocaine? Cutting up rails on the dining room table had to violate some tenet, but I couldn't exactly ask my boss. Surely, caution in this case was the better form of valor. I decided to spend the first night at my own house. But dogs don't walk and feed themselves. It doesn't matter how well intentioned you are in your 20s. It's weirdly easy to shirk a schedule when you are addled by drink and relentless boners. Turns out, if you don't show up on time to walk a dog, they just poop and pee in your boss's house. And dog shit and urine can stain carpets and leave smells that will certainly undermine any hope you had of finding that easy jocularity that seemed so appealing when used in the halls of WMA. Also, cleaning up those pees and poops so that they don't leave stains and smells is serious and deeply stressful work. I realized I had no choice but to move into the house in Venice and embrace my house sitting duties completely. The dog and I found a routine, and I watered the tomatoes and did my weekend read. As for the kitchen, I just chose to stay the fuck out of it. Screwing that up seemed way worse than failing the dog. Rugs can be replaced, but damning your boss to hell because you put a cereal bowl in the wrong dishwasher was a fate I was not willing to tempt. He called me on one of my final nights in the house to see how I was doing. He really was, and is, a sweet dude. He asked me where I was in the house. He had a cordless phone. And I explained I was sitting on his back porch eating dinner. He was excited, and I could hear him telling his wife I was enjoying the yard. Well, I had to confide. I was a little buzzed. I wasn't sure how wine fit into the whole kosher household thing. I didn't dare drink it inside. He started to laugh. He was a huge wine drinker. But the laughter gave me license to come clean. Honestly, I'm not eating anywhere inside your house. You can tell me the whole kosher thing is no big deal, but I am not risking it. He laughed even harder. I'm actually going to take all my garbage back to my own house and just throw it away there. I was only half joking. My car was a pigsty anyway. Hey, he said, Carol Ann is asking about the tomatoes. I had been terrified of letting her down. Cross the wife and you can cross yourself right off the list. I had been watering the tomatoes dutifully, and she had been right. They did ripen on my watch. I had tried them that morning. She excitedly grabbed the phone. They're ripe? They're actually ripe? She was super excited, and I felt like this was the kind of intimate victory that might seal our friendship forever. Yeah, I told her. Big red clusters of them everywhere. I ate a handful this morning. There was a long pause on the line, an ominous silence, and then her tone shifted. A handful? She asked accusingly. Geez, was it wrong to eat a handful of tomatoes? It felt to me like an endorsement of her green thumb. It wasn't even true. I'd eaten one. No one eats a handful of tomatoes when they're devastatingly hungover. But then I came to understand the true nature of her distress. How big are they? She asked. Normal cherry tomato size, I offered. Are you kidding me? She bellowed into the phone. They're cherry tomatoes? That is not what the guys at the nursery told me. Are you sure? There may have been an expletive thrown in here. Certainly, she asked with enough skepticism that I got up and walked over to one of the bushes to double check. A boss's scrutiny will drive you to doubt yourself in even the most unequivocal situations. But I was right. They were cherry tomatoes. And I'll admit, I was a little miffed that I seemed to be getting blamed for this turn of events. I mean, what did she expect? She had been the one who had told me they would likely ripen on my watch. Did she really expect them to quadruple in size in the course of 3 days? They must have been her first tomatoes, and her disappointment was palpable as she handed the phone back to my boss. He tried to cheer me up. It clearly wasn't my fault. His wife was just frustrated by the situation. The promise of juicy beefsteaks had clearly been occupying a sunny spot in her brain, and it didn't matter how tangy and bright her crop of cherries might have come out. She had a hankering for fat slabs of tomato meat. But let's face it, I deserve some of the blame. I'm not saying to be the perfect girl Friday I should have found a veggie patch Michael Clayton to switch out the bushes under cover of night. But I had been a pretty bad house sitter. I didn't really mess anything up. I didn't get in any trouble for it. But I knew in my heart that what I'd done was really not kosher.